1835, Mississippi. A storm splits the sky over Hollow Creek Plantation. In the darkness of a cramped cabin, three cries echo as identical triplets are born. But they do not weep. They do not scream. They hum. From that night forward, nothing on Hollow Creek would ever be the same. The masters tried to break them with hunger, with whips, with fear. But their song only grew louder. Their humming seeped through stone walls, slipped beneath floorboards, and crept into the dreams of every man on the plantation. And then they vanished. No footprints, no bodies, just an empty cellar and the smell of smoke. What were these children? Victims, warnings, or something older, something the masters could never control? Tonight, we step into a story too dangerous to put in the ledgers, a story that refuses to die. If stories like this keep you awake at night, hit like so more people find this forgotten case. Subscribe so you never miss the next unsolved haunting, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every one. Let's keep this conversation alive together. The sky tore open above the plantation, thunder booming like cannons across the fields. Rain hammered the earth as if the heavens themselves demanded witness to what was about to unfold within Hollow Creek's walls. Inside a cabin, a single lantern flickered, throwing shadows across rough-hewn boards. A man knelt, clutching the edge of the bed frame, sweat running down his face as the storm roared outside, its light flashing like musket fire. Three cries cut through the air, not frantic, not fearful, but strangely calm, as though the storm itself had called them forth. The man stared, his chest heaving, unable to look away. The overseer at the doorway shifted uneasily, his boots wet with mud, his knuckles white against the frame. Something about the sound unsettled him, as though it did not belong to this world or any he knew. Three sons lay side by side, swaddled in coarse rags, identical in face and frame. Their breathing matched perfectly, their tiny chests rising and falling like soldiers marching to the same drumbeat. The master arrived moments later, his coat soaked through, hat dripping on the floor. He looked down at the three boys with a calculating gaze, one hand stroking his beard as thunder rolled overhead. No one spoke as the storm raged. The master gave a single order, low and sharp, and the boys were taken from the room before their father could even memorize the weight of their bodies. Carried through rain and mud, the triplets were brought not to the fields nor the quarters, but beneath the great house where stone walls glistened with moisture and the air smelled of earth and iron. The cellar became their cradle. Rats scurried away as a servant laid them on straw in the corner. A lantern hissed, its flame threatening to go out as wind whistled through cracks in the stone. Upstairs, the master poured himself whiskey, staring into the fire. Identical sons born under a storm were not a curse, he told himself, but an opportunity. He would learn what made them different. The boys grew fast, their eyes dark and watchful. From their first nights below, the sound began. A soft hum, almost too faint to hear, rising and falling with impossible harmony in the damp air. The men in the house could not ignore it. At night, when the wind died down, the sound slipped through floorboards and made even the boldest overseer sit up in bed, heart pounding in his chest. Some swore the humming was a hymn, others said it was a warning. The master refused to speak of it at all, though he drank more heavily each night, staring at the floor as though listening. By the time the boys could walk, they moved together, three shadows following one another without words. Their steps matched, their breaths matched, and when they stopped, the humming would begin again, steady as a heartbeat. The cellar became a place few dared to enter. Servants delivered food and fled quickly. The air seemed charged, vibrating faintly even in silence, as though the very stones had begun to hold the sound. Physicians were summoned, men with ledgers and steel instruments who descended into the cellar with confidence. They measured the boys' skulls, counted their fingers, compared their heights, muttering as they scribbled notes by lamplight. One physician stayed longer than the others, watching as the boys sat in a circle, humming so softly it was barely audible. His pen hesitated, ink blotting the page as sweat beaded on his brow. When the men left, they avoided the master's eyes. Their notes were clinical, but their faces betrayed unease. The sound had followed them up the stairs, lingering even after they stepped into open air. The father, who had first knelt in the cabin, begged to see them, but was refused. He worked the fields with his head down, pretending not to hear when the humming reached him in the night. Weeks turned to months, and the boys grew silent in daylight, but louder in darkness. Their song began to stretch longer, deeper, until those above could feel it underfoot like a distant drumbeat. One overseer swore the sound made his teeth ache. Another claimed it pressed against his chest like a hand. The master dismissed their fears, insisting the boys were simply strange and would eventually bend. But bending never came. The boys did not cry when punished, did not beg when hungry. They simply clutched each other's hands and hummed until even the lanterns in the cellar flickered and threatened to go out. The master's patience thinned. He doubled their labor, sent them to carry water and wood, hoping to wear them down. Still they moved as one, their faces calm, their strange unity unbroken by exhaustion. At night, the humming returned stronger. Servants whispered that the sound traveled through the ground, reaching even the quarters far beyond the house. Some found comfort in it. Others lay awake, afraid to breathe. The father heard it too. He pressed his ear to the earth outside the great house and swore he could feel the vibration, steady and unyielding as though his sons were speaking through the soil itself. One night, lightning struck so close, the house shook. In that instant, the humming swelled until every man on the plantation felt it in his chest. Some dropped to their knees, certain the storm had answered. The master ordered the cellar locked tighter. 2 men posted outside with rifles. But even standing guard, they swore the sound was louder than ever, threading through the night air until their teeth chattered. The triplets remained together, eyes gleaming in the dark. They did not fight, did not flee. They simply sat, humming their low, endless song as though waiting for something only they could hear approaching. Days passed in strange silence. The house felt different, the air heavier, as though the storm had never truly left. When the humming returned, it seemed to come from everywhere at once, impossible to locate. The physicians were summoned again, but this time half refused to enter. Those who did came back pale, saying the boys' song had changed. It was no longer soft. It vibrated through the stone like thunder. The master's temper snapped. He ordered punishment severe enough to break the boys' spirit. But when the lash fell, the humming only grew louder, until the overseer's arm faltered and the lantern went out entirely. In the dark, the sound filled the cellar, a chorus of defiance that made even the cruelest men back away. When they emerged, no one spoke. Their faces were pale, their hands shaking. From that night forward, the cellar doors stayed shut. No one dared go down without the master's order. Yet still the sound came, softer now, but constant, threading itself into every hour of Hollow Creek. Even the master could no longer sleep. He sat in his study staring at the floorboards, whiskey untouched, listening. The sound seemed to rise through the house like smoke, clinging to the walls. The father, far out in the fields, stopped one night and stared at the house. The humming reached him across the distance, carrying through the humid air like a call meant only for him. He dropped to his knees, tears streaking the dust on his face, though no one saw. The storm above growled low, and for the first time in years, he felt something close to hope. The triplets, locked away beneath the house, hummed together in the dark, their song carrying beyond walls and chains as if announcing that no man, no storm, no master would ever own their silence. The cellar walls sweated with moisture, the stones dark and slick, Yet the sound that filled them was not of dripping water, but of three low voices, humming in perfect, unnerving harmony. Above, the men of the house pretended not to hear. They played cards louder, drank more whiskey, and spoke in raised voices as if noise could drown out what slipped through cracks and floorboards each night. The guards posted outside the cellar traded fearful glances. One swore he felt the ground vibrate through his boots, as though the humming came not only from the boys, but from the earth itself. Physicians arrived again, this time with thicker ledgers and instruments gleaming like knives. They descended with confidence, faces set in the hard lines of men who believed science would bend mystery into submission. Inside the cellar, the boys sat cross-legged on straw, their eyes fixed on the newcomers. The humming did not stop when the men entered, but deepened, a sound that made the lantern flame shiver. One physician dropped his pen when he heard it. Another wiped sweat from his brow and muttered under his breath, though no one could hear what he said over the sound filling the stone chamber. Measurements were taken, pulses checked, skulls compared. But every time they tried to separate the boys, the humming rose until it rattled the instruments in their satchels, forcing them to put the brothers back together. They left pale, their ledgers full of numbers but thin on conclusions. One wrote in the margins that the sound lingered in his ears even after leaving, as if the cellar had followed him home. Days passed and the song grew bolder. Servants delivering food began leaving the bowls outside, unwilling to step in. They swore the air thickened inside, as if humming turned breath heavy in their lungs. The overseers muttered about curses. One claimed he dreamed of rivers every night now, the same three shadows standing on the far bank, waiting for him. When he woke, he could still hear the sound. The master refused to hear talk of omens. He told them the boys were a curiosity, nothing more, and that whatever strange unity they had would be broken as soon as they were old enough. But the unity did not break. It strengthened. When punished, the brothers held hands and stared silently, their hum unbroken. It was not defiance in words, but defiance made sound, quiet yet unrelenting. The sound spread beyond the house. In the fields at night, men heard it through the soil. They stood still, sweat running down their backs, wondering if they had gone mad or were being called. Some claimed the humming carried meaning. A young boy whispered that he heard patterns in it, like a song pointing toward the woods. Another swore it mapped the river in tones only he could feel. The master grew suspicious, fearing whispers of escape. He doubled the watch, posted men with rifles at night, yet even those guards admitted the sound unnerved them so badly they dared not stand near too long. Lightning struck again one evening, splitting the sky. The humming surged as though answering, the notes climbing higher until the storm itself seemed to fall silent, listening. Men dropped tools and crossed themselves, afraid to move. The father in the fields pressed his hands to the earth, tears streaking his dirt-caked face. He felt the vibration pass through him, steady as a heartbeat, as though the brothers were speaking directly to him. The master's sleep turned shallow, haunted by the sound. He paced the halls, boots striking hard against the wood, yet the humming never ceased. It came from beneath his feet, constant, patient, impossible to silence. One overseer snapped under the pressure. He stormed down into the cellar with a whip, shouting threats. But when he raised his arm, the sound grew louder until his strike faltered and the lantern went out. Men above heard his screams, not of pain, but of terror. When he came back up, he was pale, shaking, his whip left behind. He refused to go down again, no matter the master's order. Word spread quickly that the brothers could not be broken. Punishment had failed. Hunger had failed. Even fear seemed to strengthen whatever power kept them bound together. Their song was no longer background, but command. The master sent for more physicians, this time from the city. They came with their notebooks and cold instruments, but their faces changed by the second night. The humming reached them in their sleep, uninvited. One confessed that he dreamed of fire filling the house. Yet the boys walked through it unharmed. Another swore he woke to hear the sound outside his window, though the cellar was half a mile away. By the end of their stay, the physicians had stopped writing. Their ledgers were filled with smudges, unfinished sentences trailing off into nothing, as though the words refused to stay on the page. When they left, they took their instruments but not their confidence. Their silence was louder than their reports. The master raged, demanding answers, but there were none left to give that would calm his fear. The guards at the cellar grew thinner each week. Some refused to take their posts at all, claiming they would rather risk the master's anger than stand near that humming another night. Soon, the cellar was left mostly unguarded. Yet the boys never fled. They stayed where they were, humming through the dark, their voices echoing through every stone as though they had nowhere else to be. The father came closer now, sneaking near the house at night. He placed his palm against the cellar door and swore he felt warmth on the other side, as though his sons knew he was there. When the humming shifted that night, deep and resonant, he fell to his knees, overcome. Whatever message it carried was not in words, but it filled his chest with strength he had nearly forgotten he possessed. The master noticed the change among the men. They worked harder, sang louder in the fields, moved with a strange energy that unsettled him. The cellar was no longer just a prison, it had become something else. He ordered a halt to all visits, no food delivered for 3 days. Yet when the cellar door was opened, the boys sat calmly, humming softly, their faces calm, their bodies unbowed by hunger. One servant claimed the air inside smelled like rain, despite the dry heat outside. Another said he heard faint thunder, though no clouds hung overhead. The master dismissed them, but his hands trembled as he spoke. At night, the sound returned as strong as ever, filling the house like a presence. Even the strongest men began to wake drenched in sweat, certain someone stood beside their bed, though no one was there. The brothers were no longer simply children to those who heard them. They had become omens, walking reminders that something unbroken still lived beneath the house, something that refused to submit no matter the command. And so the humming went on, night after night, until it became impossible to tell where the boys ended and the sound began. It was no longer song, but a living thing that surrounded them all. Even the master, who had sworn to crush them, began to hesitate outside the cellar door. He pressed his hand against the wood and felt it vibrate, steady and low, as though the house itself breathed. The master's patience finally shattered. He could no longer tolerate the sound filling his nights, threading through his halls, rattling his sleep. He called the overseers together and ordered the brothers broken, whatever it required. At dawn, the cellar door creaked open. The air inside was thick, humming steady and low. The overseer stepped in, whip coiled at his side, lantern swinging like a signal in the dark. The boys did not move as the lash struck stone beside them. They turned their heads together, 3 sets of eyes fixed on him, their hands clasped. The humming did not falter, not for a breath. He struck again, harder this time, leather cracking like gunfire. Still no cry, no plea, only the same low vibration filling the room. The overseer's hand trembled, though sweat dripped from his chin. He cursed, striking a 3rd time, the sound echoing like thunder against stone walls. The lantern flame flickered, bending sideways as though the air itself recoiled. The humming grew louder, so loud it drowned his curses. The overseer stumbled back, heart hammering, whip dangling useless from his grip. He fled the cellar, leaving the door unlatched behind him. Outside, he collapsed on the steps, his face pale as moonlight. Word of his failure spread quickly. Another overseer volunteered, certain he could do what the first could not. He took a club instead of a whip, determined to silence the sound by brute force. But when he entered, the humming deepened until the club slipped from his fingers, clattering across the floor. His legs buckled, his chest seized with panic, and he fled without striking a single blow. The master's fury burned hot. He ordered rations withheld. No water, no bread, no meat for 3 days. The brothers were left in the dark, chained apart, their straw stripped away, the cellar colder than ever. When the servants finally opened the door again, expecting silence or sobs, they froze. The boys sat upright, eyes shining, humming faintly, their bodies still unbowed by hunger, their calm more unsettling than defiance. The master doubled their punishment. 5 days this time. Yet when the door was opened again, the same sound greeted the men. Not weaker, but stronger, filling the cellar until the chains rattled on the walls. One servant swore he saw the lantern dim, its light shrinking as though pulled inward by the sound. He refused to go back down, saying the air pressed too heavy on his chest to breathe. The master was not satisfied. He ordered the brothers chained separately, each in a different corner of the cellar. Heavy locks were fitted, iron cuffs tightened until skin rubbed raw. The door was barred shut again. That night, 3 separate voices rose, each from a different corner, weaving together into one single sound. The cellar seemed to shake with it, dust falling from the beams above as if the stones themselves vibrated. Men upstairs woke gasping, sweat covering their backs. They swore the sound was inside their skulls, impossible to shut out, impossible to escape. The master cursed and threw a bottle into the fire, glass exploding. The guards refused to stay past midnight. Some begged to be reassigned, saying the sound followed them even after leaving their post, a faint hum whispering in their ears no matter how far they walked. The master summoned the city physicians again. They came reluctantly, carrying their instruments, faces grim. They entered the cellar one by one, staying only minutes before rushing back up, pale and shaken, refusing to speak. One journal was found later in the master's study, its last entry ending mid-sentence. The sound does not stop. It grows. It follows. The ink trailed off, blotting the page like a hand had trembled. Days stretched into weeks. The punishments grew harsher. The master ordered their heads shaved, their straw burned, their bowls smashed. Still the humming never broke, never wavered, never fell to silence. The father in the fields heard it grow louder each night. He worked with renewed fury, gripping his hoe until his knuckles split. The sound filled him, not with fear, but with unshakable resolve. One evening, lightning struck so close the house shuddered. The cellar doors shook on their hinges, chains clanging against stone. The humming rose to meet the thunder until the whole plantation seemed to tremble in answer. The master shouted orders, his voice nearly drowned by the sound. He demanded the boys be silenced by any means necessary. Men hesitated, sweat shining on their brows, unwilling to face the cellar again. Finally, Harlan Price, the cruelest overseer, stepped forward. He prided himself on breaking the strongest men, silencing any rebellion. He swore he would go down himself and end the humming before the night was over. Lantern in one hand, whip in the other, Harlan descended the stairs. Witnesses said the humming stopped the moment he entered, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against his ears like a drum. He barked threats, swinging the whip across the stone, the sound cracking like thunder. Then the humming returned, sharp and sudden, cutting through the air like a blade, making his lantern flame shudder and dance. The sound rose higher until it was deafening. Harlan staggered, whip falling from his grip. His knees buckled. Witnesses above swore they heard him shout once before everything below went silent. Minutes later, the lantern light reappeared. Harlan stumbled up the stairs, face white, hands shaking violently. He said nothing, only dropped into the dirt outside, rocking back and forth as if something inside had broken. That night he vanished. Some claimed he fled into the woods, others whispered he was taken by whatever lived in that cellar. No body was ever found, no grave ever dug, no word ever returned. The remaining overseers avoided the cellar altogether. Whips cracked less in the fields. The master stopped giving orders at night, staring instead into the fire as the humming resumed, softer now, but impossible to ignore. Servants swore that the house felt different after Harlan's disappearance. Doors creaked open on their own, candles sputtered out, and the humming seemed to move through the walls like a living presence no man could command. Even the master's own hand trembled as he poured his whiskey. He no longer raged, no longer cursed the sound. Instead, he listened, head bowed, as though the brothers' song had turned into something greater than fear. The father stood outside that night, staring at the house with clenched fists. The sound rolled across the ground, through his bones, filling him with strength. For the first time, he smiled. Inside the cellar, the three brothers sat together, their humming steady, unbroken, their voices merging with the silence until it felt less like defiance and more like destiny, a song that no man could stop. The summer sky turned black without warning, clouds rolling in like an army. Lightning forked across the horizon, illuminating the fields in white flashes as thunder cracked loud enough to shake the plantation house itself. The men in the yard looked upward, spades and axes frozen in their hands. The air was thick, humming faintly before the rain even began, as though the storm had come not from the sky, but from the ground. Inside the cellar, the brothers sat cross-legged, their hands joined. The sound that had haunted Hollow Creek for years now rose, clear and strong, blending with the wind rattling the shutters overhead. Rain struck the roof in sheets. The overseers paced nervously near the cellar door, rifles in hand, though none dared descend. The humming throbbed through the stone, matching the rhythm of the storm outside. When lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it down the middle, the humming surged in answer, rising until the men upstairs shouted over it, their voices trembling as glasses rattled and oil lamps flickered. The master stormed into the hall, shouting orders to secure the house, but he too froze when the sound pulsed through the floorboards, deep enough to make his boots vibrate on the polished wood. Outside, the workers gathered near the edge of the fields, staring toward the great house. The sound reached them through the rain, carried on thunder, louder than the wind, a summons none could explain. Some dropped to their knees, clutching the soaked earth. Others stood stiff, rain streaming down their faces, unwilling to move as the sound built, unrelenting, as though calling for the storm to stay. Lightning struck again, closer this time. The overseers swore the cellar door glowed faintly, as though fire burned behind it. One man refused to stay and ran for the barn, leaving his rifle behind. The master ordered the door barred tighter, chains wrapped around the handles. Yet the humming grew even louder, until it seemed the very stones of the cellar were pushing outward with invisible pressure. Inside, the brothers kept humming, their voices rising in harmony. Their shadows stretched across the wall in the lantern glow, taller than they should have been, their heads tilted toward the storm outside. The father crept close in the rain, standing near the corner of the house. The sound rolled through his chest, filling him with a fear that was not terror, but awe, something larger than words. Thunder shook the ground, knocking loose dust from the eaves. The men in the yard backed away from the house, whispering that the storm had chosen its place, that Hollow Creek was being judged. The master drank deep from his bottle, watching the fire gutter as the sound pressed against the walls. He cursed under his breath, but he did not go near the cellar door again. Hours passed with no rest. The storm did not move on. Each strike of lightning was answered by the same relentless humming, as though the brothers were pulling the storm closer with each breath. The overseers took turns on guard, but none lasted long. Their hands shook. Their eyes darted to the door as the sound thickened, until even the thunder seemed to come from below instead of above. Some claimed they saw shapes through the cracks in the floorboards. 3 silhouettes standing in the cellar, perfectly still, humming with mouths closed, the sound pouring out as if from the stone itself. One man fled the house entirely, swearing he would not stay another night. The master let him go. Better a missing guard than another body trembling in the yard like a child. By midnight, the rain had turned the fields to mud. Men stood knee-deep in it, watching the house glow each time lightning struck, the shadows of the brothers stretching impossibly long against the walls. The father stayed rooted to the spot, unmoving despite the rain soaking his back. He pressed his hand against the ground, feeling the vibration thrum like a drum beat, steady and unbroken. When thunder roared again, the sound from the cellar swelled until it became impossible to separate storm from song. The air itself seemed alive, buzzing with some force that set teeth on edge. Lanterns blew out one by one, snuffed by invisible wind. The only light came from the lightning above, and the faint glow seeping from the cracks beneath the cellar door like molten metal. The master's face turned gray. He barked orders, but no one moved. The sound had rooted every man to the spot. Even the fiercest overseer dared not open the cellar now. The brothers' humming shifted pitch, climbing higher until the sound became almost unbearable. Men clutched their ears, but covering them did nothing. The vibration sank straight into their bones, impossible to shut out. The storm raged until dawn. When the first pale light broke over the horizon, the humming slowed, softening until it was no more than a faint pulse, like a heartbeat beneath the ground. Men staggered to their feet, exhausted though they had not labored. The house stood untouched, though the air smelled of fire. The master looked toward the cellar door but could not bring himself to open it. The father turned away last, walking back to the fields in silence. His shoulders were straighter, his steps steady, as though the night had shown him something no other man dared believe. That day the plantation moved in uneasy quiet. The overseers shouted less, their voices hollow. The workers moved slower, glancing toward the house, waiting for the sound to return with the next crack of thunder. When night came, no one slept. Men sat outside their cabins, staring toward the house. The cellar was silent, but every man swore he could still feel the faint vibration in the earth. The master sent for the city physicians once more, demanding answers. They refused to come. They claimed storms had washed the roads, but their letters were smudged, written in a hand that trembled too much to hide fear. The brothers stayed below, calm as ever, hands clasped, their eyes reflecting lantern light. The humming did not rise that night, but the silence was worse, pressing heavy as a shroud over Hollow Creek. The guards refused their posts. They drank instead, sitting near the barn, muttering about the storm that would not leave their dreams. The master slammed his fist against the table but gave no further orders. By the third night, distant thunder rolled again. The men in the yard froze, staring upward. Even before the first flash of lightning, they swore they heard the humming begin beneath their feet. The sound rose slowly, stronger with each breath, until the house seemed to lean toward the sky. Lightning struck, and the storm returned with a vengeance, as though it had only been waiting to be called. This time the men did not run. They stood in the rain, faces lit by white fire, watching the house shake with sound and thunder, watching the brothers' song tear the night open once more. When dawn came, Hollow Creek stood unchanged, but no man who had heard the storm that night could look at the cellar the same way again. Whatever lived beneath those stones could not be contained. The father wiped rain from his face, his heart pounding. He had not seen them, but he knew they were still there, waiting, their voices ready to call the next storm when the time came. And when the wind shifted that morning, carrying the faint hum across the wet fields, every man in Hollow Creek knew the truth. The storm no longer belonged to the sky, it belonged to them. Morning came heavy with heat, the kind that pressed against the skin and made every breath feel too thick. The servants carried food to the cellar as always, though their hands shook as they approached. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, silence met them. The humming was gone. The air felt wrong, too still, as though the cellar itself was holding its breath, waiting for discovery. The door swung open. Inside, the straw lay untouched, the chains hung loose, bowls from the night before still half full. The brothers were gone. No sign of struggle, no broken lock, nothing disturbed. Shouts echoed through the house. The master stormed down himself, boots striking the steps like gunfire. He searched every corner of the cellar, torch held high, but there was no trace of the three. Rifles were fetched. Overseers tore through the grounds, kicking over barrels, overturning tools, demanding answers no man could give. Not a single footprint led away from the house, not even a smudge in the mud. The father stood frozen in the field, staring toward the house, chest tight. He felt the absence as much as the others, but for him it was not dread. It was something closer to pride. The master raged, accusing men of hiding them, threatening lashes. The quarters were searched, cabins overturned, yet no one confessed, and no one could. The brothers had vanished as though the earth itself had swallowed them whole. The cellar stayed open that night, torches burning along the hall. The humming did not return. The house sat in silence so heavy it made men flinch at every creak of timber or gust of wind. Hours passed without sleep. Even the dogs would not bark, whining instead, ears flat, tails between their legs. Overseers paced the grounds with rifles, cursing under their breath, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Near dawn, one guard swore he saw light flicker beneath the cellar door. Not torchlight, but something hotter, red like molten metal. Before he could shout, heat rushed up the stairs like a furnace. Flames erupted in the lower rooms. Smoke poured from beneath the floorboards, thick and black, rolling upward into the hall. Servants shouted, dumping buckets of water, but the fire seemed to leap faster than hands could move. The master roared for the men to save the house, but it was too late. Flames caught the beams and raced along the walls, climbing toward the ceiling as though guided by unseen hands. Witnesses swore they heard the humming again, not faint this time, but loud, layered, echoing through the roar of fire. Some claimed it was mourning. Others said it was triumph. None doubted it was real. The father fell to his knees in the field, tears cutting through the dust on his face. He heard the sound clearly, carried over the fire, a farewell too powerful to mistake. By the time the sun rose, half the house was blackened ruin. The roof had caved in, walls charred and smoldering, smoke rising in twisted columns that blotted out the morning sky. No bodies were found in the ashes. The master ordered men to dig through the wreckage, to search every beam and stone, but there was nothing. The brothers were simply gone, as though they had walked through fire. Rage burned hotter than the blaze. The master ordered fresh whippings, accusing men of conspiracy. Overseers dragged workers into the yard, yet not a word was spoken. No man broke, no man betrayed. The father stood silent, rope burns across his wrists, blood on his back, but he held his head high. His sons were gone, and no lash could take from him what that meant. In the quarters that night, the men sat in silence. No humming reached them, yet many swore they felt the earth vibrate faintly beneath them, as if the sound had sunk into the soil itself. Some claimed they saw figures in the smoke as it drifted toward the woods. 3 shadows, hand in hand, walking calmly into the tree line without looking back, leaving the house burning behind them. The overseers scoffed, calling it drink-born imagination. Yet none of them would approach the woods after nightfall. They muttered of curses, of spirits unbound, of something Hollow Creek would never be rid of again. The master drank until his hands shook, staring at the ruins from his porch. He told visitors it had been an accident, a spilled lantern, but in his eyes the fear could not be hidden. For weeks the house reeked of smoke. The burned beams were torn down and carted away, but the cellar remained, blackened stone unbroken, its door still chained, though there was nothing left to contain. No physician returned to write a final report. Their ledgers were gone, some burned, some missing entirely. Whatever record had been kept of the brothers was erased, as though they had never been born at all. Yet the memory of them refused to fade. Men whispered their story in low voices around the fire, telling of the storm nights, the punishment that failed, the sound that had never been silenced. The master banned such talk, lashing anyone caught speaking of them. But silence only made the memory stronger, turning whispers into something harder, sharper, passed from man to man like a forbidden prayer. Sometimes, on windless nights, men swore they heard the humming again, faint and distant, carried from the edge of the woods. The dogs would howl, ears pinned back, as though they heard it too. One overseer quit without warning, packing his things and leaving in the middle of the night. He told no one why, but those who saw him go said his face was white as bone. The father stayed on the land, working his rows, keeping his head low. But at night, he faced the woods and listened. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he wept. The humming never returned to the cellar. Months passed. The house was rebuilt, though smaller, meaner, as though no one wanted to live over that cellar again. The master slept lightly, often waking drenched in sweat, certain he heard something stirring below. In time, travelers began to avoid the place. They said the air grew heavy near the house, that footsteps echoed behind them though no one followed, that the ground itself seemed to hum beneath their boots. The men who stayed behind worked quieter now, as though not to disturb whatever lingered. They did their tasks, ate their rations, but none dared whistle or sing when passing the ruined stones. Even the master stopped speaking of the fire. He let the ledgers grow thin, pages left blank for weeks at a time, as though writing down the truth might summon something back he could not face. The father never stopped listening. Years later, when thunder rolled and lightning split the sky, he would stand in the rain, hoping to hear that sound again, hoping his sons were still out there somewhere, and sometimes, just sometimes, he swore he did. Years passed, but Hollow Creek never shook its unease. The new house stood quiet, smaller and darker, a shadow of the one that burned, as if afraid to challenge whatever had once lived beneath it. The cellar remained sealed, its door rusting, chains clinking softly in the wind. No one touched it. Men crossed themselves when walking near, and even the dogs gave it wide berth, whining low. The master aged faster than his years. His hair turned white, his hands shook, and he drank until dawn most nights, staring toward the cellar as if waiting for something to return from the dark. The workers spoke less openly but never forgot. Around their fires they told the story of the three brothers, of the nights when storms answered them, of the fire that could not take them. Young boys grew up listening, some afraid, some inspired. They swore they would one day stand by the cellar door and hear the sound for themselves, to know if the story was truly finished. One night, years after the fire, the humming returned. Faint, distant, so soft it could almost be mistaken for wind. But every man on the plantation heard it, sitting up in his bed. The master staggered to the porch, bottle in hand. The sound rose through the ground like a tide, steady and deep. His knees gave way, and he sat in the dirt, weeping like a child. The workers came out of their cabins, staring toward the house, toward the woods beyond. They knew without speaking, the brothers had not died, had not been taken, had not been broken. The humming grew louder until it wrapped the whole plantation, a blanket of sound. Men fell silent, no one daring to move, as lightning lit the horizon just as it had years before. No storm came this time, no rain, no thunder. Only the sound, rising higher, vibrating through the trees until the leaves shook and the chains on the cellar door rattled like distant bells. The father, old now, stepped forward from the crowd. He walked across the yard slowly, his back straight despite the years, and placed his hand against the cellar door one last time. The sound changed, softer now, warmer. Some swore it sounded almost like laughter, a low rumble that seemed to roll through the earth, through the house, through every chest gathered in the yard. When he stepped back, the humming stopped. Silence fell heavy, so thick it rang in the ears. The father nodded once, as though hearing a message meant only for him, and turned away. That night, no one slept. The men sat in the yard until dawn, waiting for the sound to return, but it did not. The cellar stayed quiet, the air strangely peaceful for the first time in years. The master died within the season, found slumped over his desk, bottles spilled beside him. Some said his heart simply stopped. Others claimed he had finally heard the sound too closely and could not bear it. His sons took over the land, but they kept their distance from the cellar, letting the chains rust and the weeds grow. They did not speak of the fire or the three who vanished. But the story spread beyond Hollow Creek. Travelers carried it downriver, telling of the brothers who defied whips, hunger, and flame, of their song that could call storms and break the will of cruel men. Other plantations heard whispers and shuddered. Some feared rebellion, others feared spirits, but the story could not be stopped. Each telling made the brothers larger, greater, turning them into legend before a generation had passed. In the fields, young men worked with renewed fire. They swung their tools harder, sang louder, as though joining a song that had started years before and would not end until the world had changed. The father lived to see it. He sat outside at dusk, listening to the voices of the younger men, smiling faintly. Their song was different from the humming, but its defiance was the same. When he died, he was buried near the woods, close enough that on storm nights, some swore they heard faint humming by his grave, as if his sons had returned to walk beside him. Years turned to decades. The house rotted slowly, its timbers sagging, its paint peeling. The cellar stayed closed, though the chains rusted through and finally fell away one by one until only the door remained. Hunters passing by claimed they heard low voices inside, though no one lived there. Some dared to open the door and swore the air inside was warm, as though something had only just left. No bodies were ever found, no bones, no rags of clothing. The mystery deepened with each generation until the brothers became less men and more myth, their names lost, but their story sharper than memory. Storms still rolled over Hollow Creek, fierce and sudden. Men claimed the worst ones came when the air was too still, when no wind blew and no rain threatened, as though called by something unseen. In those moments, workers stood in the fields and waited, tools at their sides. When the first flash split the sky, they nodded to one another, feeling the ground hum beneath their feet. The house finally collapsed one spring, its roof caving inward, its walls crumbling into the cellar below. No one rebuilt it. The land was left to grass and weeds, the stones left black with fire. Still the men came, even years after leaving Hollow Creek. They stood at the edge of the ruin, listening for a sound that might never come again, but feeling it just the same in their bones. Some left offerings, a hat, a knife, a stone, not out of fear, but respect. They said it was right to honor those who had stood unbroken where no one else could stand. The story grew larger with each telling. Men said the brothers could walk through storms untouched, that fire bent around them, that no man could raise a whip in their presence without his arm failing. Fathers told sons the tale under the trees, pointing toward the woods where three shadows were said to roam. They swore the brothers still watched, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind fell still, a faint humming rolled across the ground. Those who heard it stood straighter, knowing they were not alone, knowing the story was not finished. Generations passed, but Hollow Creek remained a place no man forgot. Its soil held more than roots. It held a song, one that could never be silenced, one that belonged to every man who heard it. When storms rolled over the hills, some still said they saw three figures standing in the rain, heads tilted toward the sky, waiting for thunder, waiting for lightning, waiting to call the storm again. The humming never truly died. It became part of the land, part of the men who worked it. A sound that whispered of defiance, of freedom, of three brothers who refused to bend, break, or burn. And so Hollow Creek remained, quiet but never truly silent, its nights alive with the memory of a song that outlived chains, whips, fire, and time itself. A song that would never, ever be forgotten.